I'm Rob Licuria, Senior Editor at Gold Derby, here with Oscar winner Tim Robbins. Tim, you played Bernard Holland, and he's austere, he's intimidating, and initially his agenda and motivations aren't entirely clear to the audience. So I wonder when you first take on the project and the role, what are you working on to give him that sense of mystery? So we're kind of trying to work out who he is and what his agendas are.
It's always a great little juicy thing to have if a character has a secret, something that they're hiding. And Bernard Bernard has that secret. So it's like I remember when I was doing Shawshank, only Andy knew what he was doing, right? And so I carried that around in every scene. Um, Same thing with Bernard. He knows more than he's letting on, and he has to. There's a plus side to that, and there's a negative side to that. The negative side is he carries a burden with him, the knowledge he has that he can't share with anybody else.
I find Bernard really interesting and compelling because he is the villain of the piece. You know, he's in a position of power, he's violent, he's dominating, he's duplicitous. But there's this underlying insecurity about him that I was really watching for in your body language, your eyes, and your non-verbal cues, that which made me really interested to see where he was going. And I wonder then how difficult that is to calibrate that balance between villainous and also insecure or weak.
Well, every villain had a mom. Every villain believes that they are doing something that is important and something, and some even think what they're doing is good. Uh, as an actor, I think it's important not to judge the character and to find empathy in that character. It's our job. Um, I know from my own experience in life that good guys can do terrible, terrible things, and bad guys can often do good things. It's complicated. Uh, some people are considered bad by a lot of people in society that may be misunderstood. And some
Mm.
people are considered good that maybe shouldn't be considered good. It's very, our job is not to judge who is good and bad. Our job is to understand what the character's motivation is and what their humanity is.
Yeah. And I think if you're doing that well, along with the writers, directors, and so forth, the audience will come along with you. And
Yes.
I think that's really key to having a compelling character. Do you agree? Do you think it's actually necessary for the audience to come along on this journey, or does that really not factor into the whole equation when you're trying to build this character in your mind?
Oh, it's always factoring in. I mean, why are we doing this? We're doing it for an audience. I mean, I deal with this in the theater at all times when I'm working with my actors, is we've invited these people into our theater. They've made the gracious turn to come and be with us. You owe them respect. You owe them all your energy, and you don't want to alienate them, certainly. Um, our job, with Silo is to tell this massive story, this what I think is a cautionary tale about what happens when we get ourselves in situations like the people in Silo are. And also within that world, the the actions of those that are running it, I think, and one of the reasons I did the show was because it felt an awful lot like actions our leaders are engaging in these days.
Yeah, it's kind of scary how prescient Hugh Howey's novels have become and have been for the last few decades. Um, this journey that Bernard goes on, and by the way, we will touch on that a little later because it's fascinating to me how Silo has these parallels. But Bernard, at the end of season one, confirms to Juliet that he's pretty much also in the dark about the Silo's origins and creations. And that really surprised me. And unlike Juliet, though, he blindly follows what and believes what the creators have put together and and that they meant well and it was for humanity to sustain themselves in the post-apocalyptic world, all that stuff. Um, to me, that meant that really Bernard is a really great example in complicity. And then I started thinking about how complicity is actually so common in times like we're living now, where people go along for their own benefit or for some higher purpose. What are your thoughts on that angle?
Well, there's two different things there. I totally agree with you. There's a real problem with people in modern society, perhaps trusting too much in authority that hasn't deserved that trust. I think that we witnessed that in the past few years. Um, the how that relates to people in power, like Bernard, that's a whole other thing. These are people that, and this is another reason I wanted to play the part. I've always been fascinated with what happens in the minds and hearts, souls of people who have to make these difficult decisions for societies. They look at their planning for the future and they realize certain actions have to be taken that could compromise or hurt certain members of society, but we have to do that so that the larger number of people aren't hurt by something. Now, is that true or not? Who knows? But those kinds of decisions are being made all the time in boardrooms. People are figuring it out, planning for the future. And oftentimes they'll make a decision that will compromise people. And I wanted to get inside the head of what is that? How do you rationalize this kind of crime, really? And
Yeah.
and you know, there's also these same kinds of people feel like the public aren't intelligent enough to make the decisions on their own, because if we gave them the right to make decisions, then something will be compromised. And I don't want to live in that world. I think to be free, you have to be able to have agency over your own decisions, your own body, and your own mind. And we're falling more and more into a collectivity that is very dangerous, because we're losing the ability to think. We're losing critical thinking
Yeah.
capabilities. We're losing the ability to question authority, and that road is not a good road to be heading down, because those in authority will take advantage of that, and always have throughout history.
Yeah, and always will. And I think Hugh Howey's one of the lessons from Clean, the novel, and of course now the show, is this numb obedience that is required almost by a population in certain situations, and in the silo is the most extreme example. Without that numb obedience, there'd be rebellion, and then I guess the human race would, in their minds, cease to exist. So all that is so fascinating to me as we're watching the show. And then we get to the end, and I was so blown away with the revelation when Juliet goes outside
Oh,
that,
you're allowed to say that?
yeah, I think, spoiler alert, people, if you
Yeah,
haven't seen season one,
yeah.
what the hell are you doing here? Go back, watch it, come back to this. Um, But despite all the lies and misinformation and redirection in the silo, the powers that be were kind of telling the truth about the outside world being toxic, barren wasteland. And so now I'm really dying to know more. But I always wonder when someone like yourself is taking on this role and you're getting involved and you're reading the books or whatever, the scripts, what did you think of that reveal when you first came across it?
Well, when I read it, I was like, oh yeah. And then when I read season 2, I was like, oh yeah. Um, it's surprising. But it's not, and as a lot of things in Silo, it may not be what you think it is, which is what I love about the show and about the character. Bernard may not be who you think he is.
See, that's killing me because, like, of all the years I've been doing this, I've always tried to figure out a smart and sophisticated way to ask the interviewee to tell me about season two without me getting into trouble. I haven't figured that out yet. But what I'm wondering is, by the end of season one, it completely went against all of my expectations and really surprised me in a good way. So that makes me think season two will obviously do the same, which means I have to know.
I can promise you that about season 2.
Well, that's
That's all I
just
can say though.
that's all you can say. We don't want to get you into trouble, but well, I'm glad to hear that. So season two finished production, what I think last in March or something. So it's still fresh in the mind. Um, what I guess without obviously saying anything, were there many moments from season two, especially for your character, that you were genuinely surprised?
Yes, absolutely.
Oh, I can't wait. All right, well, let's keep talking about season one because that's safer material. So we talked a little bit about this already, but in the world of the silo, what remains of civilization is literally and figuratively siloed from knowing about history, which to me would just be the most horrifying reality to live in, to not have to ever think about what's happened in the past. So the real power is information and who has it. So do you think that that's a pretty effective metaphor for how truth and misinformation these days can so easily be weaponized against the people?
Yes, yes. And I
Pretty
think,
spot on.
yeah, absolutely. Um, and also, well, first, what information is available to people? I think we have a very dangerous thing happening where people with good intentions and virtuous intentions are using censorship because they believe it will save what their concept of the government they're living in is, right? The problem with that is that in a democracy, if you create censorship for one system of beliefs, you watch out, because if the tide shifts, you've established a situation where you're going to get censored and it's going to be legal. And this is what my fear of the reaction to disinformation and malinformation and unfortunately, in a free society, we have to allow the open forum of discussion of ideas and opinions, and some of those are not going to be things you like. And unfortunately, you just have to deal with it. You
Yeah.
can't use your power or your influence to limit that voice or to censor that voice or to deplatform that voice because it makes you uncomfortable. Because that is a recipe for disaster.
Yeah. You've got to either keep scrolling or you have to counter it with your own uh, take on
Right.
what you believe the truth is. And I think I hope we get to explore a bit more about that in season two, as well as all the amazing sci-fi elements, which of course are so beautiful and breathtaking. That set is incredible. The music by Atlee is incredible. There's so much to love. I think as well, I know when I watched this with my daughter, she was just completely obsessed with Rebecca Ferguson's character. And then I wondered, she's number one on the call sheet, I suppose. She's also a producer on the show. What did she bring to the table that you most admired or valued about her?
Rebecca is a great actor. She's also a good person. She brings her heart to the set, her caring, her discipline. She's a good leader. And I was thrilled to work with her. She's solid.
Yeah, I get that impression. I want to ask you a non-solo question before we go, a couple actually. So 20 years ago, you won the Oscar for Best Supporting Actor in Mystic River. And that was about 8 years after you were nominated as a director for Dead Man Walking. That doesn't really happen very often. It's a little feather in your cap, I suppose. But I recall in your heartfelt speech, you paid, I guess, tribute to victims of abuse and violence, and you got a rousing, applause after that. Do you recall much of that night when you won an Oscar?
Well, thank you for mentioning that was in my speech, because that night I learned there was a huge spike in calls to abuse hotlines. And it allowed a lot of people to find help. And one of the things I said that it was that it's not a weakness to seek help. There can be a very powerful platform to change things, and I'm glad to hear you talking about that. The night was fun. I was the first up,
Yeah.
so I could just start, having a good time. I didn't have to worry anymore. So
I hear a lot actually from people who have won, particularly the Oscar. And at Gold Derby, this is kind of what we do. And you go through this whole period of, I'm so happy to be nominated. I'm so happy to be here. I'm happy to see my friends from the previous film I worked on. I'm happy to see Steven Spielberg, whatever. But then as soon as your bum hits that seat, something inside you, that reptilian brainstem says, "Oh, I really want to win that now." Is that actually true?
well, I'd won every award up to that
Yeah.
point. I'd won, the Golden Globe and the SAG and the Critics' Choice and so I was like, well, it's still possible that I might not win this, but at least I'll know really quickly, and I won't have to sit here all night thinking about
Yeah.
it. But
True.
I mean, hell, I did want to win, of course. Of course, you want to win. I don't know if it was reptilian, but I, just it's nice to be recognized for the work you've done.
It's true. I think it would be worse if you'd won everything up to that day and then suddenly, someone else takes the prize. You think, well, hang on a second, this is supposed to be my moment. But anyway, I'm really glad that you won. It was a great moment. I thought it was just such a beautiful role. And my final question really is, Gold Derby recently published a top 10 greatest film performances by Tim Robbins, and it got quite a bit of traction. We went with, well, I was going to ask you to guess, but I won't do that. We went with The Player, which you actually won Best Actor for at Cannes, at the film festival. I just wonder, do you think that or another performance will be the one that you're most remembered for in years to come, when you're long gone, one day?
No, that's going to be up to whoever's curating films at that point and deciding what you will see, because unfortunately our video shops and DVD rental places are a thing of the past. So unfortunately, the library of films is going through a filter, and I'm not sure I like that. I'm proud of a lot of the work I've done. There's small movies that I did that I would like to see have more attention, like The Secret Life of Words, which is a beautiful film by Isabel Coixet that I did with Sarah Polley. Catch a Fire, a Philip Noyce film about apartheid South
Yeah,
Africa. Um,
fantastic.
there's, you know, I'm I'm lucky. How can I say it? I'm lucky. I got to work with great directors. I got to do some classic films, and Shawshank is mentioned a lot, and Bull Durham and Jacob's Ladder and Mystic River. I love all of those, but I once asked Robert Altman, "What's your favorite film, Bob, that you've done?" And he says, "I think of my films like I think about my children. I love the one that got the least attention."
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that.
And
I
so
like that.
ultimately, the one I love the most is one I directed, called Cradle Will Rock.
Yeah,
And
that's that's a
I
great.
don't even know if it was released in Australia, by the way. I don't even know if it was released there.
I have no idea, but I've seen it, and yeah, it's a good
But
one.
I think it has something to say about what's going on today. But I'm also in love with all the actors in that. Had such a beautiful time making it. It's set in 1930s New York, and um, we had a blast.
That's awesome. Tim, I wish I had more time, but I don't. Thank you for your time today, and congrats on some really great work in Silo.
My pleasure. Thank you.